Okay, so we have our basics created for the torso, and now we're going to get into the really juicy and fun stuff, creating some of the details. Not all of them, but a lot of the stuff that'll help to integrate these kind of rudimentary areas into the whole. So right now what I'm just doing is adding a placeholder for this exhaust port here. So I'm going to use the clip circle center to and make sure that it conforms to the mesh at the top of it. There we go. And I'm just going to go ahead and use the clip curve to straighten that out. And it's really as simple as that. And now I'm going to use the trim hole to push in the mesh below it, so it looks like that piece right there is going to be kind of being very accepting of our circle that we just made. So we can just go ahead and mirror that over. Now we can go ahead and use the trim hole again to push that in. Now I'm adding some kind of little details here with the Damien standard brush. These are placeholder as well. I'm just trying to get an idea of exactly how I want this to go. But all of these kind of smaller details are subject to change. Okay, and so for this area, what we want to do is get a more mechanical feel going for it. And one of the ways that I kind of wanted to do this was to add plates on existing plates, but allow these plates to kind of have holes in them, just because it looks really cool and it looks mechanical, so it'll work. They don't necessarily have to have a function, but they almost look like they have a function. Although I don't quite know what it would be. But that's not important. The important part is that it gives the illusion of function, in a way. So I masked off everything and unmasked some circles, or some cylinders, and extracted it. And now I'm just going to use the clip curve to go ahead and cut into this. Just trying to go around the border and follow the border of the mesh below it, like we've been doing regularly. And you can see I'm actually using the under mesh, the mesh under this one, to kind of use as a direct guideline, so I can draw the curve on that and then use the spacebar to kind of move it over and align it with our new mesh. Alright, and now we can use clip circle center to just kind of clip these holes out and make them equal sizes. Alright, so after we clip all these, we're going to go ahead and use the group loops to smooth everything out just a little bit. And then use the smooth brush to kind of smooth out areas that I want to be more smooth. And then we can just use the subtool master to mirror it back over. Alright, so now we're going to work on this kind of front smaller piece, the smaller detail. And we're mainly just going to be using the clipping brushes to clip it. Kind of make it look like it integrates well. So I'm going to go ahead and clip this at a curve a little bit, just to give it some flair. And I'm also going to go ahead and clip a kind of angle in here to allow for a latch type object that will give more of the illusion that this is a suit and something comes out of it when you open it. Alright, so I went ahead and remeshed that piece because I felt that it wasn't doing exactly what I wanted. Some of the polygons were getting quite stretched, so I went ahead and just made a remesh and then projected all to copy that detail over to the new mesh. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a polygroup in the center here by masking. I'm going to mask by polygroup. Or, excuse me, I'm going to group by masking, the opposite. And then I'm going to use group loops to kind of smooth out this area of geometry you see. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to invert the mask, use the transpose tool, and bring this out for a little bit of a surface detail. I'm going to use the scale to kind of angle it in a bit. And you can see in just a few seconds you can get quite a nice detail in there. Alright, and so here's the latch lever that we're going to be putting in here. I'm just going to use the clipping brushes to kind of make this work. And you can see I kind of have a little bit of clipping errors in this, so what I can do is just go ahead and remesh that and then mirror it over using the same technique we used on the previous mesh. Alrighty, so there we go. And now we're going to go ahead and move on to the neck area. And what I'm just going to do is clip it in the areas that allow for the illusion that it's snuggled really tightly in between a few of the other meshes. And that right there is pretty good, actually, because what I can do is later on in the final detailing stage, we can just go ahead and throw some little doodads, some smaller meshes in there to kind of bridge a lot of the areas that you see, to kind of unify them and make them look like they're overall one piece. Alright, so I'm going to work on the front of the neck area, and what I want to do for this is, it's going to be really cool because this area is going to give us a lot of opportunity to create some of that hidden detail that we kind of went into on the upper back. Specifically, a lot of tubing is going to kind of be flowing around his neck. That's what I kind of have in mind for that. So we'll see what we come up with. But for right now, we just kind of need this placement, and then we can do those highly sophisticated details later. So I'm just going to go ahead and clip through this to get the overall shape and make sure that it kind of aligns up with everything. And you can see I've already gone through and made group loops and cleaned up some of the edges of the mesh that were protruding out too much. But it's a fairly repetitive process, so we can go ahead and skip it. Alright, so now I've made another extraction with some holes and clipped these areas like we've attempted to do previously. Well, actually, an attempt implies that it was unsuccessful, so that we did previously. And then we can go ahead and group the loops, and you can see it gives us kind of this funky stretching right here, so we can just go ahead and reclip it, and it will look great. I'm just going to go ahead and polish that off a little bit. Alright, so now I kind of want to just dupe this a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the subtool, and then just scale it down a little bit, and rotate it around until it feels like it's in the proper place, because we have a lot of layering of plating that that will help give the illusion that there is some depth to this character. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of work on the chicken wings area. These don't look entirely like wings, but they will look somewhat like wings in that they're coming off the character a little bit and kind of angling out a little bit. But I kind of wanted to give just the feeling of a wing without making a crazy blatant wing. So what I've gone ahead and done is just angle it out, and I'm going to go ahead and create a mask and create the same kind of detail that you see in the upper back by extraction. And so I'm just going to go ahead and unmask these little hole things. And previously you saw me using the mask circle to unmask those areas, but the brush works just as well because the brush itself is a circle, so whatever works, works. Okay, so now I'm just going to go ahead and clip these areas. There we go. I'm just trying to make sure that they're all the same size. And you see I'm checking the outer edge of the underlying structure to make sure that those two cuts are parallel. And then I'm just going to go ahead and group loops. And that gives us a pretty cool and non-functional wing. And what I'm going to do is continue to rotate this around and actually duplicate it so that there's kind of a layering effect of the wings. So I've went ahead and duplicated it and rotated it down a bit. And I kind of want to give the illusion that these two wings rotate on the same pivot almost. So that's why you see it rotating down in the center. And I'm just going to go ahead and use the Subtool Master to mirror these over to make them symmetrical. And now I'm going to try to start working on some of the details in the under area of the upper back that we had previously talked about. And the ones I'm creating now are not going to be the final product because I didn't really like them. But it's always good to show the process, and it's kind of important. Even if you put a lot of time into something, say you put a few hours into something, and then you go back and it looks bad, just because you put a lot of time into it doesn't mean it's correct. So it's important to kind of check yourself, and especially when you put a lot of time into something, you kind of fall in love with it. So it's important to really just check yourself and see, is this really working, or is it not as successful as I'd wanted it? And sometimes a lot of repetition is what it takes to make something really good. So we can go ahead and transpose that over. And I'm just trying to kind of make a railing here that looks kind of functional. So I'm going to go ahead and extract this after I get the masking correct. There we go. I just wanted to make that parallel to the other masking edge. Alright, so we can go ahead and extract this. Bam. And then once we use group loops, we can go ahead and start cutting in this kind of sweeping rail object. Kind of like a monorail, I guess. And so I'm just gonna go around to all the edges and clip them all, just to make it fairly straight. And then I'm gonna kind of clip under here so that it appears that this thing is actually sliding on there. So I'm gonna clip the underside of it now. Just turn on ghosting so I can see what I'm doing a little bit better. There we go. Alright, so that looks pretty good. A cool detail, but it doesn't really fit in with the character, so I'm gonna go ahead and redo that area. And so what I want to do is I kind of want to give this inset feel to it, so I'm going to go ahead and make another polygroup and then use group loops to create a smoother edge there so I can just push that in using transpose. A little bit more here. Okay, perfect. And so now I'm going to go ahead and use this edge that I've created right here. And I'm going to extract that and create kind of a padding area for the inside. Alright, so now that you see I've extracted it and it's a huge mess, so what I'm going to go ahead and do is just use group loops to make the smoothness that I want. And then I'm just going to go ahead and use auto groups to separate all these crazy areas and just delete hidden after I hide those areas using groups. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and start the details in this, the really juicy stuff right here. I'm going to go ahead and hide that to make my masking a little bit easier. Set the thickness to 1, and you can see again we have a huge mess, so I'm just going to go ahead and use the same process. I'm going to go ahead and use auto groups, and just go ahead and select that group and hide everything else, and then delete all the other stuff. Alright, so we're just going to go ahead and clip all these areas. You see I went over to the other side to make sure that these two sides are parallel. And the same with this one. There we go. So now I'm going to go ahead and use group loops and clean that up. Alright, so now I kind of want to create a little bit of tubing in here. This kind of tubing really helps with a lot of the illusion, and it just looks really cool, so there's no reason not to include it. But it's important not to overdo it, and so the way I chose not to overdo it is to just kind of keep it in areas that are all either hidden or in between some of the major armor plates. Alright, so I went ahead and duplicated the Z-spheres, just so I didn't have to go ahead and remake the whole thing. And I deleted most of the Z-spheres, but the duplication was still worth it because I was able to keep the size of the tubing, which I wanted to duplicate. So I'm just kind of rotating this and conforming it to the surface and making it look like it kind of inserts into this little box up here. And I'm going to dupe that one and scale it down a bit after I delete a few of these Z-spheres. Try to get into place here. Alright, so that's about right. So I can go ahead and start adding the in-between Z-spheres. And one thing I would say about using these Z-spheres is you should really only use as much as you need to get the information that you want. Same with it's kind of the same idea as when you're sculpting. You should only use as many subdivisions as you need to get what you need. So don't overdo it with the Z-spheres. Just I kind of have added a few extra that I didn't really need, but as long as you don't go too far overboard, it'll be okay. Right, and to kind of separate these two tubes, I just added another box in here. And I'm just going to go ahead and clip this guy down ever so slightly. There we go. All right, and now I'm going to convert all of my tubing into actual meshes. So I'm just going to go ahead and go down to Adaptive Skin and preview it, and make adaptive skins out of these. The density you should really play around with. You can either go a lot lower and kind of tweak it a little bit, or you can go higher and smooth it out. It's really depends on each situation. Alright, so the extraction there is pretty messy. All of the meshes I've really extracted out of this larger back mesh have been pretty messy. So I'm gonna go ahead and have to use auto groups and just hide everything else besides the object I want, and then delete again. I'm just going to go ahead and move that down into position. And I'm going to use clip circle to make way for the tube. And I'm going to go ahead and clip a lot of this stuff out. Alright, so with the tubes, I have, it's great that I have a number of poly groups in there. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and extract a few details out of these, just by selecting one of the poly groups and sizing the amount of polygons using the selection tools to about where I want it, and then just extracting it. And I kind of want to, all these tubes need to have places where they're inserting. And so I'm kind of making a little cover here to protect the tubes in a way, or to make it look like they're being protected. and I'm just going to go ahead and extract this ever so slightly. It's going to be a small extraction, a smaller mesh. And so it's going to be flat for now, but I'm going to use the morph brush to kind of make it so that it conforms to the tubes that are already there. So I'm going to go ahead, first I'm going to go ahead and clip the edges just to make it a clean mesh. There we go. You can see I'm kind of using the same type of angles that I've been using for the other details in my clipping. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and pull this out and kind of place it over the areas that I want it to cover. And then use the matchmaker brush and just matchmake it. It's really a simple process. It's a huge help for this kind of stuff. And now I have to move it into position, because matchmaking actually doesn't move the mesh to, it doesn't flatten the mesh directly next to the objects that you're matchmaking with. It just kind of deforms it. So we move that into position. And what I'm trying to do here is I'm just going to go ahead and hide a lot of these objects and tweak the positioning of this a bit more just to make sure it lines up correctly. Yeah, and you can see there's a little bit of pinching with the polygons there, but this is such a small detail when you're viewing the entire character, so it's not going to affect anything at all, actually. But the positioning is something to get pretty accurately. Okay, so I'm just adding a few more details to the tubing. I don't want to overdo it with the tubing, but I also don't want to leave them just bare because it kind of loses its effect if nothing's there. Shrink the selection a bit. And then extract these. There we go. And so we get kind of a nice band effect around the entire tube. Okay, so I'm going to make the inserts for the top now, and this is going to go fairly quickly. I'm just going to go ahead and select a few poly groups and shrink them down. And then I'm going to extract it. And here we go. And this is almost good enough, but I'm going to go ahead and clip a little bit of it just to give a bit more of illusion that we're so often seeking in this character. So I'm going to go ahead and clear a lot of those groups or unify them just to make sure that my group loops work properly. And then I'm just going to go ahead and clip a little bit. All right, so now we're going to get on to a few more of the details. So I've extracted this kind of cylindrical area. What I'm going to go ahead and do is mask off a few lines around the center. There we go. And make a few groups from masking, and then apply group loops again to get clean edges. And after I smooth that out, I'm just going to go ahead and use Inflate to put those in and make it kind of like a fusion coil or something like that. Something technically cool like that. All right, and I'm going to do the same thing to the top as well. Okay, so I have extracted another piece. And I'm now putting details on it, so I extracted from that extraction. These are all pretty basic extractions, but it's important to kind of see how this all builds up. So I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this little doodad down a few times. There we go, and try to make the alignment feel right. And what I'm kind of thinking right here is maybe like some sort of circuit board, but on a bigger scale, so a little bit different. And so now I'm just coming in here and I'm adding some surface detail. So I use the layer brush for that, and I'm going to use some of my mechanical stamps that I've created to test out a few things and just see how they look. And so I think I'm pretty much done with that detail, so we can go ahead and move on to some other areas. So I'm going to go ahead and work on this lower back area right here and try to create some sort of detail right here. And so I've gone ahead and extracted a new subtool. And after I delete the hidden erroneous polygons, I'm going to go ahead and clip this bad boy out a bit. I'm trying to kind of create this spinal effect. So there's kind of this recurring theme of a spine. So I'm going to go ahead and cut into these. Or this. Okay, sweet. So we have a pretty basic shape, and what I want to do is go ahead and throw in a few details here. So I've accidentally not inverted the mask. So I'm going to go ahead and extract the area that I masked, or the area that I wanted. And after I delete the hidden areas, I'm going to go ahead and clip this bad boy yet again. Alright, so I'm trying to just build up this area. I'm trying to take this basic shape that I have and through adding multiple subtools kind of work on that illusion that we've been talking about. So I've created kind of an angular shape at the top that is kind of a recurring theme, that kind of wide angle. And I'm going to go ahead and clip the edges away. And eventually I'm not going to keep this design either, but it does provide some good instances of how to create certain types of details, just with mostly using the clipping brushes, and then a few minor details with perhaps the layer brushes is what I'm using right now. So again, I want to kind of build this surface up again, so I'm going to go ahead and create a new extraction. This mask is pretty messy, so I'm going to go ahead and switch to my mask curve to get rid of the lumpy stuff. Alright, so I'm trying to see what looks better, inflated outwards or inwards, and I guess outwards is the way to go. So just throwing in a few more details, and I think that's a really cool detail. This little plating right here, it looks really cool, but in the entire context of things, when you're just looking at the entire torso, it really is, it has too much detail. And when you give something like this that shouldn't be getting that much attention, when you give that a lot of detail, it's going to steal the show. It's going to capture your eye and kind of not let go. So eventually we're going to have to tone that down quite a bit. And the detail really needs to be somewhat evenly spread. But we'll go into that a little bit later when we go into the crazy detail that we're going to get into. The massive amounts of detail. Because your eyes really need, they need a place to rest. And so I've kind of chosen the joints and the in-between areas of the armor and the hidden areas to be where the detail is. So it kind of gives that illusion again. But I want to keep the main areas of the armor kind of just flat surfaces with very little surface details. So your eye doesn't get dizzy with all the details. It can actually rest somewhere, and so it can read the shapes a lot better. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and fix my mask like I've been doing. Just use the edges of the actual mesh to figure out how the mask should be. And you see me clicking Alt twice to lock that angle that I have from the masking in place. It's pretty helpful. Alright, so there we go. I'm going to go ahead and extract this after I unmask a few circles, which is going to kind of be a recurring theme. Okay, beautiful. I think the 3-circle thing is going to be recurring more than the 6-circle object you see on the upper back. But nevertheless, circles are cool. Alright, so I've measured all those out, and I'm just going to use clip circle center to make my beautiful circles. And then we'll use group loops to kind of soften up all the edges. Okay, perfect. So now we're going to start making a few changes to the chest area. And the thing I'm trying to consider here is the fact that I want to have this cylindrical shape kind of coming out where the serratus muscles would be, so kind of under your pec and out to the side a little bit, in between the side and the front of your torso. And so I want the chest to kind of conform to that. I want it to align with that and make way for that area. So we can go ahead and clip circle, center. And then I'm going to use this center of that as an opportunity to kind of push this in using trim hole. Just to make it so it is accepting of it. So now I'm going to use transpose to just push this in a little bit. And start clipping out my chest. And so most of these chest angles are going to be hard angles, but when we come to the circular area, we're definitely going to want to use clip circle centers to radiate out from the center of the circle. So there we go, I'm just trying to find the center, and then I'm going to make it a little bit bigger and clip it out. And so I'm just going to mirror these pieces over. And now I'm going to re-extract our chest piece, the actual plating. So I'm going to go ahead and go to group loops and group them. The loops, of course. And then I'm just going to go ahead and clip around it. This is getting pretty predictable, huh? But that's okay. We use it because it works. There we go. Now clip circle centers. Bam. So I went ahead and used group loops now, just to kind of soften everything again. And hovered that out a little bit to give it some space, just so the shadows can give it some depth. And okay, so this is the end of the torso. I'm going to be changing a few things at later stages once I find out what to do with the details. But for now, this looks pretty good, so we can go ahead and move on to his beefy arms.